Hello again, EZOVERDOSE here. This is my Discipline Priest Guide, Part 2. It's going to cover some more advanced things and stuff that I left out intentionally on the first video. If you missed the first video or don't understand something in this video, please check the description for a link and it will point you over to that one. So, I'm going to talk about spirit that you need, trinkets, how to use Mindbender or Shadow Fiend with Hymn of Hope, gems, Reforging, Inner Focus, mouseover macros, Spirit Shell, Prayer of Mending, Twist of Fate uptime, and then some Siege of Orgrimmar tips at the end. So that's what's going to be in this video. So to jump things off, talk about spirit that you need. And I'd say a good number to aim for is 10,000 plus. And usually 10,000 plus is a good number with the exception of a few fights. And those two fights are going to be Narushan and Malkarok, because those two fights have constant AoE damage. So to maximize your heal per second, you're going to constantly be using your level 90 tier talent as soon as it's off cooldown, which can chew up your mana pretty good, especially if your raid members are not assisting each other with mana cooldowns. So if you are not relying on them to use mana cooldowns at all, I'd say 14 to 15,000's a good number for those two fights to never have to worry about mana. So jump into trinkets. I'm using one DPS trinket and one healer trinket. This is the DPS trinket off Garrosh. It procs 20,000 intellect, and it does proc off of Smite, Holy Fire, and Penance. The healer trinket is off of the Siege Crafter, and it procs off your atonement heals. One trinket that does not proc off of Smite, Holy Fire, and Penance is this one, Purified Bindings of Immersus. It's similar to the one that drops off of Shaw of Pride, but it's the DPS version. But for some reason, even though it says your attacks have a chance to grant 9,300 intellect, it does not consider Smite, Holy Fire, or Penance an attack apparently, because that trinket never procs. So keep that in mind if you have it and thinking it's viable. It's only good for the equip effect. Now, another thing about the spirit, I am using the tailoring embroider, so that's another 3,000 proc. So I'm getting 3,000 plus 20,000. I'm getting 23,000 spirit proc just off procs, and I rarely have mana issues. The only time I have a mana issue is on one of the two fights I mentioned, and we're nearing Enrage, basically. So let's talk about gems and reforging. For this kind of stuff, I refer to sites like Noxic, Icy Veins, Elitist Jerks, and then I take the information that I get from there and I reference it to one of the top players in the world. So, for example, I'm playing on US, I use the US Armory, and I will Armory Blood Legion Guild, and then I will go to the roster, sort by rank, and I will find somebody that's the Raider rank, that's like 575 item level or something, and I'll just kind of reference the information from those sites to what the top players are doing. And for the most part, when we're talking strictly Discipline Priest, their Discipline Priest has way less spirit than I'm using, but this goes hand in hand with what I was talking about, your raid members not helping you keep your mana pool up. They're not, cycling their mana cooldowns. So you got to think, solo mission, unless you're on in an actual raid guild and you're doing normal modes or something, and you know that you can rely on your team to get mana back, and then you can, cut back on some of the spirit. So for the most part, yellow sockets, you're going crit, pure crit. Red sockets are intellect and crit, and blue sockets are spirit and crit. And the names of these gems are Misty Wild Jade, so a green gem. Then a Potent Vermilion Onyx for the orange gem, and then the yellows are smooth sun's radiance. And then all of my gear, I basically reforged the secondary stat, if it was not crit, to crit. And the priority that I used for that, for this one specific occasion on the cloak where I had haste and mastery, I pulled from haste instead of mastery. And some of that is due to me using that metagem. I chose to use the DPS metagem instead of the healer metagem, just because for the most part mana is not an issue because of the amount of spirit that I have, but having 1 second basically global cooldown smites and penance is like 1.5 seconds, and that trinket procs quite a bit, or not trinket, but that meta procs quite a bit, so that is a pretty big chunk of heal per second added to your overall on a long fight when you consider that it procs probably 2 to 3 times a minute. So 2 to 3 times a minute for 10 seconds, you're getting global cooldown cast for the most part. So let's talk about Hymn of Hope and Mindbender, and when you should use Hymn of Hope as a personal cooldown and not a raid cooldown. Obviously, if you're using it as a raid cooldown, you just use it when someone calls for it. So when you're using it as a personal cooldown, you want to overlap Mindbender with Hymn of Hope. So Mindbender gives you mana back as a percent. So when you use Hymn of Hope gives you max mana. Increase your total mana by 15%. So you're getting back mana, you're getting 1.75% mana back with that extra 15% on top of it. So I'm not totally sure of the numbers that you get back, but you'll get back more is the point. So whenever you're probably 30% mana, something like that, you would cast Mindbender first, and then immediately after you would cast Hymn of Hope and channel it. And usually before you do this, you, depending on the situation, you line up like a cascade or line up your level 90 tier talent first. Do that. That way everybody is as topped off as you can get them with one spell, and then go into the Mindbender Hymn of Hope channel. So let's talk about Inner Focus and how you want to use this in a PvE scenario. It reduces the mana cost of your Flash Heal, Greater Heal, or Prayer of Healing by 25% and increases its crit chance by 100%. So it's a guaranteed crit. It's only good for one cast with a 45-second cooldown. Now for the most part, if you're following my guide as like a step-by-step, you're going to be atonement healing quite a bit. Well, this part I'm going to teach you how to weave in Spirit Shell into your normal rotation and when you should use it, and this becomes useful. So the way you want to set this up so you don't have an extra key to hit or bind to hit that's specifically just for Inner Focus is you need to make some macros, and it's basically like the macros I taught you how to do in part 1. They're just simple mouseover macros, and it says /cast Inner Focus /cast target equals mouseover Flash Heal, Greater Heal, Prayer of Healing. And the reason why you can stick these two in the same macro is because this does not trigger a global cooldown. This is off the global cooldown. So you can stick this and another spell in the same macro and then cast it. And if you are using an add-on to heal, like Healbot or vuhdo or something of that nature, you will need to name the macro in your add-on. So for example, I have right click set to use the Greater Heal macro. and then control middle click is the prayer of healing macro. And then don't even have that set properly, which I'll fix right now. So then that would be the flash heal macro. So that way when you are using your add-on and you click, you get the effect chance of the macro. And this comes in handy more so with the prayer of healing than anything else, but it's just good to have it set up to where if you use any of those spells, it works. Something extra just to throw in here, this isn't really healing related, but Leap of Faith is also a spell that you would want to make a mouseover macro for. And that's just so if you're, you see somebody standing over here and you don't know who they are, I play with the names off, and you just see some dude standing over here like in the Nova and he's about to die and you want to save him, you have this set to a mouseover macro and you just mouse over him and hit that key and yank him to safety. So that comes in handy once in a while too. And then of course you can use the mouseover macro on the UI, whatever you're healing off of, if you're healing off of party frames or an add-on or something. So for Spirit Shell, this is an interesting spell. It says for the next 10 seconds your heal, flash heal, greater heal, and prayer of healing no longer heal but instead create absorption shields that last 15 seconds. So this one's kind of tricky to use, and for the most part you're going to be using this with prayer of healing. And if you don't understand how prayer of healing works, it's unlike any other spell in the game. Prayer of healing heals group specific. Okay, so this is group 1, this is group 2, this is group 3, 4, and 5. So if you cast prayer of healing on any of these 5 people, it's going to heal all 5 of those people, assuming they're in range. So if I was to heal this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, it's just healing the same group. So when I use this, I'm healing this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, just the top person or whoever's in range, one person in each group. And your priority for max heal per second should be the groups that have the most people in them / have the most people in range. Because if one group, say you pulled a boss and one group only has 3 people in it and all the other groups have 5 in it, you're going to get more heal per second by shielding 5 people than you are 3 people. So the trick to using Spirit Shell effectively is knowing when damage is going to come. So you're looking at your DBM timer and you know some AoE damage is coming, like a big Nova effect, and this lasts for 10 seconds. So let's assume the Nova effect, like Calamity on the Protectors, it's like a 2-second cast. So that means you have, when you see it coming in at like 12 seconds, you'd probably want to pop this and start shielding up your group. Now for the most part, if you have about as much haste as I do, and let's just add 5% to this number because that's what you have raid buffed. So if you're rocking like 14% haste, that puts your prayer of healing at like a 2-second cast. And 2-second cast, adding the latency factor to stuff, is only good for getting you 4 groups shielded. So you have to pick your 4 groups carefully. Make sure you follow my instructions and pick the groups that have the most players in them / have the most players in range. Now what you can do, as I did, referring back to video 1 with the add-ons, I have set up a tell me when icon to track when my meta procs, and that gives me 30% haste, with 30% haste added on to the 14% you'd have raid buffed, or I would have raid buffed, that makes my Prayer of Healing a 1.5 second cast. With a 1.5 second cast, I can get a shield on all 5 groups. So sometimes I use that to my advantage to line it up, other times I don't. It just depends, how much heal per second I think I can get out of using it. And it's kind of good practice that when you know AoE damage is coming up, that you use it regardless if you have that proc. If you're playing the same way I'm playing and using the DPS meta, you just use it. If you get the proc, great. If you don't get the proc, whatever. Another thing to go along with the stuff I just talked about with Spirit Shell, like I said, it's important to watch your timers. So by default, your timers, wherever you have them, and they start somewhere and then they end up somewhere else, they do that transition at 8 seconds. So your window for Spirit Shell is 15 seconds. So you want to, and then the effect of it's 10 seconds. So you have like a 5-second window to make use of this, and then give or take the 2 seconds of cast time that the boss is going to cast the AoE. So I put my transition to 12 seconds. So when the effect has 12 seconds left, it shifts over, and that's just for me to keep a better eye on it. I'm already probably glancing over and know like when an effect is going to happen anyway, but it's just an easier reminder. That way you're not too late on the situation. For example, on like Shah of Pride, he casts that AoE pretty quickly, so if you're late on that one, you're gonna miss an entire group, maybe 2 groups. Now, a good time to use prayer mending is when you know it's going to bounce to every single person due to constant AoE damage. And I feel as though, even if that's the case, I only cast it if I need to cast it on myself. So if I'm low and I need to make sure that I'm the first one to get the heal, I'll cast it on myself. And that's only if I know it's going to bounce to everyone in the raid. All 5 charges are going to be used. And an exception to that would be if you can't cast anything else and you need to move. That would be the one exception. Other than that, you're going to get more heal per second just casting atonement heals. Beware. So I talked a bit about Twist of Fate in the first video, but I really didn't talk much about how you can maximize the use of it. And it's basically as simple as kill ads, tag stuff that's low health, and I prefer to tag stuff with a Holy Fire that has low health. That way the dot from Holy Fire continues ticking and continues to refresh it. So if you're DPSing a boss and the boss is 90% health and an ad comes out, you can tag that ad with a Holy Fire and then get right back on the boss. Assuming the DPS are, killing it and it's gonna die within the time frame that Holy Fire is going to expire on it, you'll, have 15% extra damage and healing that you wouldn't have any other way. And on certain fights where ads are constantly out, you can get quite a bit of uptime on this that you normally wouldn't be able to. Alright people, that's it for part 2. I know I said I'd stick some Siege of Orgrimmar tips at the end, but this video is just running on a bit too long, so that's going to be a separate part. Make sure you stay tuned for that, and see you next time.